Check. Can Zoom hear us?
Yes, we can.
Yep, I'm here too.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. And we are all present. Roll call intact. Welcome to Brandy, our new member of the Planning Commission. Do we need to do a audio check for us? Okay. So number 2, additions, deletions, or corrections to the agenda, if anyone has any.
Just question, the comp plan proposal comes up in item 6 and item 8. Is that by design? Or should we just pick one or the other?
It's up to you. I didn't know if it was going to be ready for a vote, so I just wanted it in both places in case it was needed there.
I'm fine with it just being under business is fine. We don't need to. It's all right.
So I move to approve the agenda with the deletion of item 8A.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Next, approval of minute meetings from 4/9/2024. I've reviewed those. I don't have any corrections or additions.
I have one correction. Item 5 reports, it's Commissioner Blasey instead of Commissioner Fry about the report on the staging policy.
Bo, can you scroll that up under item 5? Anyone else?
I move to approve the minutes with the one correction.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. All right. Public input. Bring the public on.
It's my understanding someone's got a birthday today. Happy birthday.
For determining which staging areas are used and for how long, and also to look at whether or not those staging areas are being actively used or if something's sitting there stagnant. So I want to go through this with a little bit of detail so you understand the mechanism, and then at the end of this, I want to charge the Planning Commission with the decision whether or not they want to take on this scorecard and maintain it or not. But if you go across the top where it says a week of 2024, that's simply the week of the year with the date, the Monday, the first day of that week being indicated. And then on the left side are each of the staging areas. You'll notice that it's truncated. It's not quite exactly what's in the policy. The Oak Street right-of-way is eliminated because there's intent for that to be used for emergency egress. So that's left off. And then at the very bottom, also left off is the Rocky Top, because that's a contracted staging area that our private users would choose to contract. And then at the very bottom, I've added the Spruce Avenue Triangle because was witnessing material staged there for quite a few weeks and thought it needed to be identified as a staging area. So to take the first one on the list, behind Town Hall. So you'll see in week 17, it was green, it was empty. And to back up again, each Monday of each of these 4 weeks, I've been driving by these staging areas to identify the color code to be identified. So behind Town Hall in week 17, there was nothing there. And then on week 18, a trailer arrived with picnic tables on it. And then it's stayed there for the last 2 weeks. And that's why it's changed colors. So green indicated it was empty. There was no usage. Yellow identified that it had actively changed. Then the red identified that there was no change. So the picnic table trailer was still there for the last 2 weeks. Then if you go to Oak Street, I have an error. What are the proper names for the 2 places on Oak Street? The one by Clay's house versus the one that's directly across from the library. I mean, not the post office.
So the space next to Clay's house that we've been referring to as the old town hall lot.
That's okay. So that's the one that's been eliminated. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So Oak Street right away, in week 17, there were stumps and quite a few piles of fill dirt that was from the project that was just there locally. And as you'll see, for the next 3 weeks, it stayed in place. And then Monday of this week, the fill dirt was gone, the roots remained. Olathe Street has stayed empty the entirety of my surveys. The pool parking similarly stayed empty. You'll see this Spruce Street or Spruce Avenue Triangle had material there stagnant for 3 consecutive weeks. Monday of this week, it was empty, looked gorgeous. What I'm proposing is that that the combination of the renewed land use code and this be a tool for determining whether or not the town's needs are being met. I greatly respect that a policy was drafted for that intent, and I believe that the town's needs are being met, and that this is a way of monitoring those needs. And I also want to make note of some creativity that's occurring just recently, and that is the way staging area, if you just look at what's going on right now with the bridge project, is material is being staged right there locally for immediate use with the contractor. So it's right there, at the gazebo bridge. And then also with the dumpster blind, again, materials being staged very close to the projects. So that's some creativity that didn't exist previously because otherwise those materials would have been exclusively placed at one of our designated staging areas. My point is, I believe that the town's needs are being met. And I would like, and if you go back 4 weeks ago to the Board of Trustees meeting, that's when I asked, well, first off, in public comment, Rocco said, can the Planning Commission please review the red line version of the policy? And during that meeting, I kicked it back or made a motion to kick it back because I wanted the whole need for the policy to be reviewed. I felt like with the changes that were in place, that it became superseded both by the revised land use code and a scorecard like this that could be used. Thank you. And I'm well past my sand, sorry.
Thank you. Wow. We have a busy public today. I love this.
Don Walker, 10855 Belvedere Avenue. I have a couple of comments, and one following up John's comment on the PC staging policy. I am a believer in policies, but I'm also a believer in procedure. Policies and procedure go hand in hand, and I think John's flow chart with staging areas, active and non-active, is an excellent procedural matter that a policy would help establish. So in establishing a policy, and after doing some research on this matter, I felt like the policy could address two different realms in the staging. One is the public work staging, and the other is private or contractual staging areas. Whereas the staging that occurs with the public works is more of a administrative matter and could well be managed through town management as far as when and how long. And with John's flow chart, that would be easily, the information of the staging areas would be easily accessed, and with the information of how long and you know which ones are active and which ones are not. So I think that is an administrative matter that could be easily handled internally by the town manager. But at the same time, with you know, bigger contracts like, you know, the most recent CSUs, I think that a policy would be well placed as to how those matters or guidelines would be handled in the future. And certainly each you know, instance would be different. So it'd be very difficult in establishing a procedure because every instance is going to be different. And I could see a policy much more useful in those private instances. So in summation, I think that dividing your consideration between, you know, public works and contractual staging areas would be useful. And also utilizing John's work and the procedure of the policy itself. The other comment I'd like to make quickly is on the comprehensive update timeline. And then I noticed that your submission was suggested to be in mid-November. As a trustee, I'm going to begin working, you know, on budget matters for 2025 in August. I'd like to begin in August and have it pretty well put together by the end of November. So if you're submitting something to the board in November, then there's going to be relatively little time for kickback for adjustments. Just something for you to consider. Oh, and so, yeah, it would be nice if it's possible to get at least a preliminary recommendation, you know, sometime in late August, early September for, you know, my personal preference. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go to reports. Commissioners, do you have any reports? Commissioner Fry? No reports. Commissioner Esch? No. Commissioner Bonwell? No, not at this time. Commissioner Morales?
No.
Commissioner Blasey?
No.
Thank you. And staff, any comments?
Yeah, I do have staff reports from Baseline Engineering, and I would like to have Ben and Julie present just so we don't keep them
Please.
too far into the meeting. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and members of the commission. I am going to share my screen if I can, Bo.
We can see that on this side.
Oh, great. That was quicker than usual. Ben Thurston with Baseline, Julie Estrel. We're here to, well, Becky asked us to put a presentation together that's an orientation of land use and development review. This is a presentation that we gave to the Board of Trustees at their last meeting. Or maybe that was a workshop. I'm not sure that was actually a meeting, but in any case, and then she asked us to give it to you all tonight. And so just wanted to point out that everything that we have in here is really based on your code. So these aren't just general practices that we're talking about. We're actually looking at your code and sharing with you what we're seeing as what's in there and what the various, procedures and regulations are. So with that, I will turn it over to Julie.
Thanks, Ben. I'm going to introduce kind of the first half of this presentation and hand it back over to Ben. And this is just a quick overview of planning, planners do, and how the code relates to that. But Ben and I are hired as consultants to help the town administer the land use code, which is one of the chapters within the municipal code for the town. And pretty much the foundation of the land use code kind of starts with this map. This map is in the works. It's being updated, so this particular one is not current, but it shows the different land zoning that is assigned to each property that's within the town limits. The yellow in this map is residential, and the green is generally open space, and then the others are mixed use business and such. So Ben, if you want to switch to the next slide, we can talk about what those individual zoning districts are. So with the new land use code that you have adopted recently, there are 2 residential zoned districts. R1 is low density residential, and that's just what it sounds like. It's single family homes, bigger lots. R2 is a medium density residential, which accommodates medium density, of course, and it also includes a range of some accessory institutional and community facility uses as well. The next zone district on your in your code is the MX1, which is a mixed use district. This district accommodates primarily commercial and industrial uses, but does allow certain residential uses as well. O is open space, and just like it sounds, that accommodates open space lands. It limits the amount of development of other types of development in the open space. PUD is a planned unit development zone district, and this is a little bit of a create your own zone district. If you have a property that you want to develop in a certain way, and the property doesn't necessarily meet one of the standard zone districts, then as a property owner, you could apply and work with the town. You would work with Ben and I as planning staff to develop a planned unit development plan, and that would become your zone district. There are 2 overlay districts, and overlay districts, like they sound, are on top of kind of a base zone district. So you could have a mixed use district with a downtown village overlay on top. And so those restrictions would be, or those regulations, the development standards would be in addition to the underlying zone district. The other overlay district is the Historic Preservation Overlay District. And just like it sounds, that's for, you know, historic preservation areas that have additional development standards to kind of preserve those historic areas. Thanks, Ben. Next. So second thing that comes along with the zoning is the land use. We talked a little bit about the different types of uses that are allowed in each of the districts. This is a picture directly from the code, and it's a table that outlines each specific use. This is just the first few that are listed in the code. But as you can see, like a dwelling, single family dwelling is allowed. The X is a use by right, so that's allowed in R1 and R2. C is conditional, so a single family dwelling is a conditional use in mixed use. And we'll talk a little bit more about those different types of use types a little bit later on in the presentation. Not shown here, there are also accessory uses, which, just like they sound, it's accessory to the primary use. This might be a home occupation or something. There are temporary uses. And then if it's a blank cell, that indicates it's a prohibited use. So this chart would indicate that a single family dwelling is prohibited in open space. Next. So, you know, once you've just established your zoning of your property and you know what uses are allowed, there are also development standards that go along with that. So if you want to put a single family home in the R1 district, there are certain regulations or standards that you have to meet, including a minimum lot area, a minimum lot width, building setbacks, building heights, the density. So that's usually like how many dwelling units you can have per acre is usually the calculation that's determined. And then there are development standards in your code regarding fences. Fences generally require a fence permit. There are development standards regarding sensitive land, stormwater and drainage. Those include wetlands, stormwater management, drainage, grading, wildflowers, and floodplains. Most of these items, wetlands, stormwater, drainage, and grading, are generally reviewed by in the town's engineer, Kiowa Engineering. But they're still part of the application. Planners would still accept these drawings and then forward them on to Kiowa for verification that they meet these development standards. There are also parking standards. There's generally a minimum number of spaces required based on the type of use you have. And then there are design and layout requirements for parking lots. The land use code also has development standards for signs and for the subdivision of property. And that concludes my portion of this presentation. We put this slide in just to remind myself to ask if there are any questions on that information before I hand it over to Ben.
Yeah, hi, this is Rocco Blasi, one of the commissioners. Question about the densities, the R1, R2. Do you foresee any changes at the state level? Modify or eliminate R1 to increase density and create more housing availability?
Ben, do you want to speak on that?
Sure. I mean, you know, we saw last year there was an attempt at the state level to basically, you know, from my perspective, erode some local control and address affordable housing and try to put some mandates in place for certain things relative to density, relative to requiring, you know, municipalities to allow accessory dwelling units. That wasn't successful. You know, I don't know if you know, I guess I wouldn't put it past anybody to try again. I think everybody, I think most people can agree that affordable housing is an important statewide issue. But I think there, you know, from my perspective, it's a question of, you know, whether the ends, the end of, you know, sort of trying to create affordable housing is justified by the means of taking away local control. So it's not something that I'm in favor of, and you know, municipalities across the state have come out against that, as well as the Colorado Municipal League. And you know, I continue to support local control, but hard to say if it's going to come back again, and if it did, whether it would be successful. Rocco, is that what you were? Is that what your question was intending to? Is that the subject you were intending
Right,
to
yeah,
cover?
thank you. Yeah, and I think Mayor Dixon has something to add as well. We'll stand
Yeah,
by.
it's House Bill 1152 on accessory dwelling units. It's passed. It's not signed yet. Now, is it going to be one of those that the governor decides not to sign? Who knows? I doubt it. The feeling is it's going to pass and get signed by the governor. We'd have to look at if there's anything specific. I think, my opinion, we're under the threshold of 1,000 people. And so I think, again, in my opinion, that it would not be applicable to us. We already have ADUs into our code. Now, there's other things that are happening dealing with parking. And again, because of our small size, I'd have to look again, not positive, but I don't think we'd be affected by the parking. Manitou Springs is, because they're on a transit corridor. And I think there are a lot of amendments, especially on the parking side of it. And so there were, if you're in a transit corridor within so much distance within that transit corridor, you cannot enforce parking limitations. So, yeah, so TBD. Long story short.
Staff looked into this a little bit recently too, and that was basically the conclusion, is that there's been so many amendments to that House bill, and that getting final approval is evolved, is the word that was used. But they Department of Local Affairs is preparing some information on that they'll be sending out to be shared with you all shortly.
Any other questions before we move on? All right, let's go ahead and forge ahead. So in your code, there are a variety of land use application types. And this is all of them. This is the full list of the application types that you have in your code. They're organized under the green categories that you see here: development permits, subdivisions, ordinance amendments, historic preservation, and then flexibility and relief. So under development permits, you have major and minor site plans. You have a conditional use permit, which is what would be required if the use that you're trying to establish in a particular zoning district, if it says in the code that it's a conditional, if it's got a little C, you know, where Julie showed you on the table, then that means it requires a conditional use permit. You know, just to kind of dive into that a little further, the basic assumption of a conditional use is that it's generally considered acceptable in the district, subject to a review of the potential impacts that you're going to have from that use. and your ability to mitigate those impacts. So essentially that exercise of going through a conditional use permit is evaluating the impacts, determining what would need to be done to mitigate them, and then determining if it's even possible for them to be fully mitigated. And then as long as all those boxes are checked and it meets all the criteria, then generally it should be considered acceptable. And then a temporary use permit is also under development permits. Under subdivisions, you have minor and major. A minor is essentially something that goes straight to a final plat. And then a major requires a two-step process, a preliminary plat, followed by a final plat. Ordinance amendments include rezoning. So if somebody wants to, apply to just rezone their own property, you can either rezone to what's called a straight zone district, which would be any of those initial categories in the list that Julie showed you: R1, R2, MX1, open space. I think it was those four. And then otherwise, you could also rezone to PUD. And as Julie mentioned, that's essentially a negotiated district. It's where you get to write your zoning. So you won't find PUD standards that appear in the land use chart. You won't find PUD standards that appear in the development standards, because the basic premise is that of a PUD is that you are writing your own, the applicant's proposing uses and development standards, and then the planning commission and the board of trustees is making a decision about whether that's acceptable. And then land use code text amendments are also under ordinance amendments. Historic preservation includes landmark and district designation. So this is whether it's an individual property or an entire district where you're actually designating it. And then once you have a designated landmark or district, then there's a certificate of approval process for making alterations to landmarks or buildings within a district. And then finally, flexibility and relief, which includes variances, minor modifications, which are essentially variances that meet a certain minimum threshold of how much it's being changed. And then appeals. Appeals could be of an administrative decision of staff. It could be an appeal of a planning commission decision, appealing to the board of trustees. So those are all your application types. And then the next topic is who makes the decisions, and that depends on which application type it is. There's just a few that are staff decision making, and that happens with a minor site plan, a temporary use permit, and then I listed minor modification here. It's not entirely clear to me how minor modifications are intended to be processed, but the conclusion that I've reached is that if it's a standalone minor modification, let's say somebody built something accidentally into the setback, a foot. If it's just a standalone minor modification like that, then I believe that staff has the authority to make that decision. If it's anything that's accompanying another application, like let's say it's as part of a major site plan, they're asking for a minor modification, it doesn't rise to the level of a variance, I would interpret that to mean that should go to the planning commission as part of that major site plan application, and that the planning commission should make that decision. If it's a minor modification that was attached to a conditional use permit, then it would accompany that application and go to the planning commission for a recommendation, then ultimately to the board of trustees for a decision. The planning commission, you can see the list here of the things that the planning commission can make the final decision on. That's the major site plan, minor subdivision, a major subdivision for the preliminary plat step only, landmark and district designations, for historic preservation, certificates of approval for historic landmarks or districts, and then appeals of a staff decision. And then the Board of Trustees handles conditional use permits, the final plat that it is for a major subdivision, rezoning property, whether it's straight zone or to a PUD, a land use code text amendment, and then appeals of a planning commission decision. All right, we wanted to run through just sort of a typical land use approval process, just so you have a good understanding of, you know, essentially what happens before you see it, and then even what happens after you see it. And so in the code, it starts with a pre-application conference that's generally required for development permits, subdivisions, and rezonings. And I think it can take different forms. It could be a meeting. It could be a meeting over Zoom. I think it could even be a phone call. I think there could be an exchange of emails that happens over a period of time that sort of amounts to the pre-application conference. But it's essentially it's an opportunity for the applicant to meet with staff and get some initial information about the process, about how the code's going to apply. If you know, maybe there's something in there that they're proposing that's just completely not allowed by the code, it would be our opportunity to let them know that, and that they don't really have a path forward, that kind of thing. So it's beyond development permits, subdivisions, and rezonings. It's considered optional for other application types. There is a formal submittal required, so we would need to make sure that for those that it's required, that submittal is met. And then at some point after the pre-application conference, we would actually get a formal application and the fees associated with it. The website includes a number of application checklists that helps the applicant know what needs to be submitted for each type of land use approval. Fees are established by the Board of Trustees. When the application first comes in, the first thing that we need to do is make sure it's complete. And so we're going to do a completeness check. If it's not complete, we're going to convey that to the applicant, and typically we would not accept an application until it's fully complete. There is a provision in your code that gives the town the ability to pass on fees associated with outside consultants, whether that's Baseline or Kiowa, even your attorney, if your attorney is getting involved in land use, land development review. And then once an application is complete, then we would refer that application to applicable internal and external agencies and individuals for review. And so that would go out for some period of time. The code doesn't define a specific period. Normally, on a first application, what we tend to use 3 weeks as a reasonable review time. And then we would get that back and we would send those comments out to the applicant. So the review and revision of the application, review is based on the standards and requirements in the code. In addition, I think especially for Kiowa, there are a number of things that they're reviewing based on best practices, best engineering practices. Their engineer review is a much more technical review, and there's widely accepted civil engineering practices that would apply because not everything is fully defined in the code. But for our review, we're looking at the code. The code is our guide. We're looking at those standards that are actually defined in the code. It is an iterative process. We're going to generate comments. The applicant's going to make revisions to their application and resubmit it. We're going to review it again. If we're being good communicators back and forth, then the hope is that we don't have to do that too many times. But Julie and I certainly have experience with applicants where somehow that communication is not at its best, and so we're having to kind of go back and forth a few times. A lot of times what we experience is just not being responsive to a particular comment, where there's been no effort made to make a revision based on the comment. What we always ask for is, if we generate written comments, we want responses, actual written responses. That way we know that the applicant actually looked at everything. And so that tends to lead to less of that, non-responsiveness that we sometimes see. Our goal is to try to resolve all the comments, but there are some remaining comments that can be proposed as conditions of approval. And so that's usually a judgment call by our team that will look at what's left in terms of comments. And if we think something can reasonably be proposed to the Planning Commission and or the Board of Trustees as a condition of approval, then we'll usually go that route, just for efficiency. Once the application is ready to go to meetings, we would schedule those meetings and complete public notice as specified in the code. We would prepare a staff report with findings and a recommendation. And then if it's a staff decision, we would still go through that process and prepare a report for the town manager's review and signature. We don't make those decisions ourselves. We still go through the same process. It's just that the town manager serves as that decision maker. And then following the decision, there's a few different issues that come up. One is the effective date. These are all defined in the code. The appeal procedure, modifications to approvals. How do we handle if somebody needs to come back and make some kind of change, an amendment, the expiration of approvals, again, defined by the code, and then the permitting process. You've got building permits that go through the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department, and then there are other permits that run through just GMF staff and don't need PPRBD to be involved. And then just wanted to quickly go over the findings. These are the approval criteria. The way your code works, there is a base of general approval criteria, and that's what you see. That's the 6 items A through F that you see on this slide on the left side. Those are the base approval criteria that apply to every application. And I'll just note that the first 3 are pretty typical. And the last 3 are typical as well, but they get a little bit redundant because they're basically talking about, they're all talking about adverse impacts in one way or another. I've seen some codes that will sort of word that and combine that into a single criterion, but your code sort of lays it out in 3. And so you'll find that for us, in terms of making findings, will often be a little bit repetitive in our rationale for those findings. And then real quick, I'll switch to the next slide. For certain applications, and this was the example here was a conditional use permit. For certain applications, there's additional approval criteria on top of that, the base general criteria. And in the case of a conditional use permit, there are these 4 right here. And so in those instances, we need to make findings on all of the criteria. Going back here just real quick, I wanted to to touch on this because it came up when the only application that we've brought to you is the horse wellness facility. We brought you a major site plan and a conditional use permit. And in the major site plan, we had some conditions of approval that related to a CDOT access permit, related to ADA, and the comment that was made in the hearing was by commissioners was that that you didn't think you had the authority to impose those conditions. And at the time, I was not too quick to really to think through that and provide you a good explanation. And it's truthfully, it's really the first time I've had any, a commission tell me that they didn't think they had the authority to do something. So it kind of threw me a little bit. And so I've put more thought into it. And I just wanted to cover that with you guys real quick, just because I think it's important. It's important to understand how your code works. I think the way that you do have authority is actually through that very first criterion A there that says that it complies with applicable requirements, including this land use code, town, state, and federal law. And so when there are state and federal laws that apply, like ADA, your code says that you should make a finding that it complies with federal law, and the only way you can do that is to ensure that it actually that it actually does. So I just that's one thing. We're going to continue to make similar findings and similar recommendations. When we talk to the Board of Trustees about this presentation, and we had your attorney Jeff Parker there, I think what we heard from Jeff was that just in terms of the question, are you absolutely required to do those things? I think what we heard from Jeff is the answer to that is no, you're not. I do think that if you want to comply with your code, though, it does say that you should make that finding. But I think that the practical consequences of you not enforcing those things is that let's say in the case of CDOT with their access permit, if you don't require them to obtain an access permit from CDOT, then and later on they still have to do that, and through that process with CDOT, they find out that the way they've designed it doesn't really work, and therefore the site plan that you approved now needs to be changed. Then that creates a very inefficient process. That means that they have to come back to you after the fact and make that change. So that's where we would continue to encourage you to the extent that you can to require applicants to follow state and federal regulations. All right, I think that's the end of what I've got for you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, this is Rocco Blasi again. You talk about an inefficient process, but we have to balance efficiency versus cost to our customers. Our customers are the petitioners coming before us. I just wonder what it costs for the horse stable property to get reviewed, because that's a balance as well. If you look at a fine-tooth comb above and beyond our land use code, that cost is either borne by the taxpayer or by the petitioner. And I think that's something we as a planning commission need to be fully cognizant of. When we did the land use code rewrite and we put approvals at the town staff level, we never envisioned having a consultant for the very easy things like decks, sheds, fences. I understand the horse property was a bigger issue, and I think it's appropriate that we had a consultant. But I think it's a balance for the planning commission between efficiency, inefficiency, and then ultimately the cost. And I have just a general question. Who bore the cost of the baseline consulting for the horse property?
I mean, that's not a question for me. I hope it's not because I don't know the answer to it.
So the answer to that question would be both instances are correct. There was a fee that the applicant paid to cover the cost of a majority of the application. I'll have to do a little bit of a breakout to know the exact percentage. The other thing to keep in mind with this one is that this was our very first project that Baseline took on. Certainly, it's going to be the least efficient of all of them while we're getting to know each other. And so there were some costs that rightfully so the town did incur as part of onboarding them as consultants.
But I would like to follow up with you on the points you made about the cost to the applicant. And the thing that I would suggest is that by not requiring them to get an access permit, the risk that's being created is not just an inefficient process, but the potential that they would make improvements and invest in their property in a way that ultimately needs to be changed. Because if they were to do something, and I don't think this really applies to the horse property in actuality, but it could for others, whether we're talking about utilities or we're talking about access, if we're talking about ADA, any of those that would get enforced after the fact means that the applicant would potentially be making costly investments to their property that would have to be undone. So the risk is actually that it would cost them much more in the long run. We're all sort of imagining that maybe there's no enforcement that happens, and in that case, I suppose they sort of get away with it and they don't have to bear that cost. But there's a risk, and if the planning commission and the town board are not requiring those things, then they're essentially passing that risk on to the applicant.
So I think that, just personally, making those things above and beyond the code conditions for a permit is not in our purview. Making it known to the applicant that they may have to comply with other things above and beyond code from your consultant perspective would be helpful. But as a planning commission, I'm not comfortable making any conditions above and beyond what's in our code.
Yes, but complying with state and federal law is in your code because it's in the criteria that you all wrote for considering every application that you look at. And your town attorney has confirmed that it actually is in your purview. Although, as I said, I think what I heard him say is that it doesn't mean that you're required to do it.
So, Ben, and one of the solutions that we kind of came up with collaboratively at the last orientation was just to develop a process for informing the applicant that that's part of what needs to occur. And then also, but it does need to be documented that that's one of the things in the staff reports that comes through of that was a recommended condition that had come up, whether or not you all deem it worthy. We wanted to make sure that we had a process in notifying the applicant that those could be some of the consequences, and those are the other things that they might need to do. So that was essentially the where we landed with it. It seemed like it would be a good solution to make sure that, everybody's informed of what needs to occur, and just a little bit of a minor modification of what you will see in the future on applications.
Okay, so we will see recommendations, but also the recommendations for certain conditions when we make our decision or we make our recommendation to the trustees.
Yes.
Yeah, everything that we do is a recommendation to you and you all in making in making your recommendation, you have to reach your own conclusion and the board has to reach their own conclusion. You know, we're only here to advise you. And that's what we said, you know, when you did consider the major site plan, that's the point at least we tried to make was that that's merely our recommendation.
Excuse me, Ben. Commissioner Esch would like to make a comment.
I had a little question. Is that similar to, you know, they also have to get approvals from the Pikes Peak Regional people, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, through the building department, that
Building
is similar to the building
So you
department.
advise them to that also?
Their application to the building department is separate, but they do oftentimes run concurrently and prior to the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department issuing an application that might have a land use component to it. We do have to sign off on it and we're able to, you know, list which conditions were included and approved by the Planning Commission and the Board of Trustees or if it was just approved.
Well, this is kind of a silly example, but I've said it before. Many years ago, it was probably 25 years ago, my son was replacing some old shingles on our 100-year-old house right by the front door. And the town clerk at the time, who also enforced the code, who's a friend of mine, walked by and she said, "Does your mother have a permit for that?" And we didn't know. And Charlie said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, she should know. You know, she that's just her." And so we went down to the office downtown. That's what we thought we had to do. And they laughed at us and they gave us a permit for $10 to put up, but we didn't really need one. And so there's what I'm talking about is full information to everybody that they really better look into. Or if we don't want to make it a formal condition, because it really is unfair if people don't know that there are all these other agencies that have a piece of the action. So that's my only point. And I sort of agree with the man that is speaking that it wouldn't be a bad idea to at least put that in, but maybe that's what you've already said. So
Thank you, Ann.
And this is Commissioner Bonwell. I have a question, Ben. So who are these bodies that would come and find out that you hadn't, you know, complied with ADA and all that kind of thing? Is it a building or would it be when you go to sell the property and an assessor looks at it? Or I don't know. Who are these bodies that find out, that bust you, find out you've made a mistake?
Yeah. Well, I'm not aware of any effort by the federal government to, you know, go around doing active enforcement on ADA. Interestingly enough, ADA mostly gets enforced by private sort of activist citizens suing people for not conforming. And so that's the way you'd mostly get busted on ADA. I'm also not sure when it comes to CDOT access permits, what level of enforcement the state has, that CDOT has in terms of, you know, roaming their highways, looking for people, you know, modifying their access without a permit. So I just don't know how active they are in enforcing that.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. Most things get enforced by complaints. So if there was an accident or if there was a disabled person who couldn't park or, you know, and there was some incident that causes a complaint, then that usually gets followed up by the agency to see, you know, if the property is in compliance with those state and federal laws.
And that I assume could be pretty costly, I would guess, and damaging potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, well, you know, there's probably, there could be some penalties involved. I don't know, but the biggest thing is if you're making investments in your property that you end up having to undo. And that becomes just wasted money. You've got the demolition
Right.
cost, you've got to, rebuild it in some way. That all gets very costly for sure.
What, Ben, do you have more presentation or was that the final?
That was it.
Okay, and then we have one more commissioner that has a question.
Ben, this is Brandy Morales. If you don't mind going back to the application slide.
Oh, sure. I think I can do that.
Kind of dovetailing off of what Commissioner Esch was saying about making sure that we're cross-referencing all of our agencies and whatnot. When I read through the land use code, I also realized that we rely heavily also on the El Paso building code, and I did not see any cross-references, which makes it a little confusing for normal everyday citizens to try to follow the proper guidelines and know where to go and how to, where in the other document is it. These are things that, at least in government documents, I'm very used to seeing a cross-reference, and it makes it a lot more user-friendly.
Yes. You said the El Paso building. I'm sure there are some regulations in the code that reference El Paso County's regulations. Building code wise, interestingly enough, Pikes Peak adopts their own building code. It's called the Pikes Peak Regional Building Code. And which is odd because most jurisdictions adopt some version of the International Building Code, a standard code. I'm sure that Pikes Peak's code is very much based on and similar to the international code. It's just not, they just don't adopt it in full and use that name. Yeah, there are some other regulations in the code that I think do reference El Paso County regulations. I think in response to that question, those might not show up as conditions of approval as much as that's part of our job in the pre-application process when somebody first comes in to lay out sort of those referencing those other regulations that that are going to apply. So that's when we have the first opportunity to sort of lay out the, whether it's Pikes Peak or El Paso County regulations, but also the first time we have an opportunity to bring up the thing about CDOT, if we think an access permit's required, that ADA is going to apply, all those things. As far as I know, I'm not sure to what extent that happened because we weren't here when the horse wellness facility first came in. So we were sort of at a disadvantage. We picked that up midstream and then got that to you as quickly as we could, trying to piece together, what was needed for that. That wouldn't be typical. Again, we would, at the pre-application is when we would talk about all that.
Okay, thank you.
Ben, thank you, and Julie. And I found this very useful, your review. Can you pass on, and we have a new member, so that I think it's really great. Could you pass on those slides to us and maybe we can print them or use them as a reference? I like how streamlined it is. It helps me think about it. I like colors. I'm visual spatial, whatever. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I believe we forwarded it to Bo already this afternoon. So
Yes.
Okay,
Nikki,
thank
can
you so
remind me if
much.
that's correct.
Yes, I do have that.
Okay, great.
All right, we'll jump off now. Thank you so much.
Okay, just need to plant a couple seeds. The code that he's talking about with the state and federal, it's a requirement on the decision-making body to find compliance with those state and federal. That is something that Becky and I have already talked about potentially changing because none of us have that capability to determine the compliance with state and federal. That's something that unfortunately made it through in our land use code, and in my opinion should be at some point changed. The second seed I'd like to plant is that of the need for independent engineering review. Especially if the plans are coming in stamped by a Colorado licensed professional engineer. So those are the two seeds I want to plant with you. Do we really need independent engineering review when we're getting drawings in that are stamped by a licensed Colorado professional engineer? Usually, once they put that stamp on it, it's on them. And by sending it out to an independent review, are we now taking on some of the potential liability? So 2 seeds.
And that's in our code?
Right now, it's in our code to send it out, but these are potential
Can you,
changes.
can you reference that for me later or something? What,
Yeah, would you
part it
explain
is.
that some more?
what 12 point whatever?
Okay, hang on. I have the old original color copies.
And then the
The-
process, when it leaves here and goes to PPRBD, which is Pikes Peak Regional Building Department, which is a county entity for El Paso County. They're looking at the drawings as well and the plans. So they look at it from a structural point
Yeah.
of view. None of us are engineers here that I know of. But yeah, if a PE puts their stamp on it, I mean, that's their license and credentials. And if it's wrong, then it's on them.
I think the majority of the time why it's in the town's best interest to have an engineer that works for us reviewing those is to ensure that we don't have impacts to private or public property, such as a driveway getting put in without appropriate drainage that could impact the city's road systems. So, but I do think that there is an opportunity to look at it and say, you know, and our engineers, they do not look at, the structural components of plans. That's for the Pikes Peak Regional Building Department to do, but by and large, mostly what they're looking at is that drainage, erosion and grading control plan.
And having been burned by that personally, highly sensitive to it. I actually had to call Kiowa and say, why are you wanting us to put in a concrete approach on a dirt road? And he said, that's just my recommendation. I said, you realize your recommendation becomes our requirement. And he took it off. So, but yeah, it's under under decision, review and decision, the general requirements, that's where it comes in. It says decision-making bodies shall review all applications, blah, blah, blah. But that body then determines if it complies with all the, like, land use code, town, state, and federal law.
So
to me-
under, so number 1, general requirements, review and decision, or which one are you, sorry?
Well, I don't know what the numbers are
Oh,
because I've got the old original
oh,
color.
okay.
I think Rocco knows what I'm talking about. So,
No, I
yeah,
don't. Okay, I don't though.
but yeah, it's in our code. I don't have the exact,
Okay,
I can get it for you if you'd like. So.
okay, where I'm at,
is it
okay.
I?
And then is Kiowa Engineering this outside independent,
Yeah.
redundant person you're talking, or
Yep.
that you're talking about? Okay,
Yeah, that's our contracted
okay,
independent engineering
All right.
review.
Okay.
But yeah, Teller County doesn't do that. Teller County, if you bring a drawing in, it's stamped with a licensed Colorado licensed professional engineer. You're good to go.
so yeah, so if we don't do Kiowa, they come, you hire an engineer to fix your driveway, whatever it is, then Pikes Peak Regional Building will look at it
No.
and no.
Pikes Peak Regional, that's another thing I had a problem with what he said. Pikes Peak Regional develops codes based upon the national codes and whatever the
Right.
state forces upon them. The state is forcing upon them
Right.
quite a bit. They don't make up their own codes. They basically compile all the national codes and use those. So yeah, they deal with the building. And so if there's an ADA requirement for the building, then more than likely Pikes Peak Regional Building is going to be reviewed.
I see, they're not engineers, okay. They're doing
Pikes Peak
building.
Regional is
Oh,
engineers.
okay, then,
So
okay, but so
Engineering.
that's my question, is so you had your engineer do whatever X project, then Kiowa said to do this, but then Pikes Peak Regional had to also, okay,
Pikes
right?
Peak Regional was, they just dealt with, think of the structure. If you try
Okay.
to think mainly of the house itself,
Right,
the structure, they really didn't get involved with grading and erosion control.
I see. Okay, got it.
It was
So-
Kiowa that did.
If we're saying that rather than having a independent review by an engineer, that we can trust the one that's brought before us, can we require that they do include an assessment for secondary effects like erosion and flood control and things like that in
But
their
it would-
initial one that they're doing and bringing to us?
It would be we still keep the same plans. However, those plans are actually reviewed and stamped off by a licensed Colorado professional engineer. So in other words, you still have the same plan. It's just like in our case, our builder had licensed Colorado professional engineer review and look over the grading and erosion control.
Right, but from what the discussion led me to believe is that the reason we were doing the independent review was because we were checking for impacts to private and public property. So if that is not currently being done in the licensed Colorado engineer professional review that is being brought to us, what's the course of action? Is that something that we can say, hey, we recommend you include this, or we will have to do this?
Could be. I'm just planting the seed right now. Because like I know Teller County, they just, the grading and the grading and erosion control plans come in with a licensed professional engineer stamp, yada, yada, yada. If we set the criteria, yes. That would have to be part of their compliance. But we have pretty much general criteria in our land use code that I think should be adequate. But that's just the seed I wanted to plant after that.
Thank
Training
you.
Exercise.
Okay. We're going to forge ahead to the business section of the meeting with 6A staging policy. So this is, you guys got this in your packet. Bo, do you want to present it? Am I going to present it?
I'm happy to. And I'm gonna, give me just a second, I'm gonna pull it up on mine because my eyes are a little bit strained today. So this was, just an attempt to kind of look at the, staging policy that was proposed to the Board of Trustees and kind of test it against, first our own municipal code and then again, practice, of how it's done. Of course, this staging policy has, been some time in the making. We did have some projects that did have some impact to, some of our residents and spaces downtown that people are typically used to being able to enjoy and weren't able to. Just some things on here that, if, there's conflict between the policy and the municipal code, that, the municipal code should supersede it. We are unable to alter, change, not abide by the municipal code without, some significant procedural amendments, including public hearings and publications. We wanted to ensure that this also included private construction projects. And the real thing is that when projects are brought forward, oftentimes they're acknowledged by the Planning Commission, approved by the Board of Trustees. Nothing happens just overnight. That those projects have been approved knowing that the benefits are going to outweigh the temporary inconvenience placed upon them by the utilization of those areas. And the other piece of it is that, by denying applications based on anything that is not, informed by our land use code requirements, denial of applications could put the town at some legal risk. So we did talk or identify also in here private projects. If they do desire to use the town right away for staging, once they have approved appropriate approval, typically they've worked with town staff to identify a location that best fits those needs, and the entity performing the please
Cons-
scroll.
Construction.
The construction. We do require that they obtain a temporary use permit in accordance with our town code and our published fee schedule. But we did like the idea of being able to post a physical notice at the staging site and some information on the website, just so that people were able to understand why that space is being impacted. This could become a little bit tricky, particularly in mailing. Mailing is quite expensive thing to do. We know certainly well after the election. And it can also cause a pretty undue issue on the person doing the project or company doing the project if we have to wait for a certain amount of time for appeals to occur. It is not been particularly easy to get folks to bid on our projects. Our projects are oftentimes not large compared to the high dollar projects that they're finding in our neighboring communities. And it's been a little bit of a challenge to attract and retain qualified construction companies to complete our projects. And so it was really a staff fear that making things too difficult would cause them to, reconsider whether or not they would want to work here. So we do want to make sure that projects that are, funded oftentimes with grant monies are able to move quickly and that we're not putting undue burden on them. This table is fantastic. I have not seen Trustee Bell's proposed additional tool, but I like the idea of it. The best thing about this is that it really does talk about, the limitations as well as the assets that each of these spaces provides. But not all of them are going to be able to be used for larger projects. Also, I should say that it's going to be pretty uncommon that we have projects that are as large a scale as the CSU pump station that would take that long. And I'm certain that they would have very much liked to have their equipment and supplies much closer to them. There just wasn't the space availability there. So, the big thing here with this policy is that within our land use code as it exists now, we have a process and a procedure, a policy that accomplishes all of these goals. It is through the use of our temporary use policy. I think in the past, the town had used a lot of either I'm flaking on the word right now. The revocable permit process. The code still does have the opportunity to use those revocable permit processes. Oftentimes we found that they were being utilized for items that shouldn't have probably been revocable, that were a little bit more permanent in nature, such as somebody building stairs to their house that encroached into the egress. And therefore they were incurring a annual fee to be able to keep their stairs there. Those are much more efficiently dealt with an easement. An easement still allows the town to be able to use that space for utilities, for other things as it needs to. And it does retain its right should it need to develop that space, but it definitely alleviates some of the burden on the applicant and an annual fee. And outside of that, it's mostly just temporary use permits that would accompany any of the land use applications as needed. Any questions on that?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I have a question. When I was reading this, the construction staging policy,
Mhm.
you're talking about appeals. That is just for private. You can't appeal a decision that the town has made for on a public right of way, right?
Well, and we would hope that before or an issue got to an appeal process, that somebody would come in and express concern and seek more information of why is this here? How long is it going to be here? And unfortunately, the CSU project did run a lot longer than it had intended, than they had intended to be there.
Do we have to have an appeal process? Is that needed?
So there is an appeal process in our regular land use code. I think that this entire policy is accomplished with your new land use code without the policy.
That's what I was kind of thinking. We don't need the policy, really. Okay.
So if I may, we were given the task to produce a policy by the last Board of Trustees a while ago. And so we did. I see this as supplementing our land use code because our town has a way of forgetting things. The land use code will not envision staging, but we all understand that this is a big issue in certain neighborhoods. I think if the policy goes away, my fear is that this will be forgotten and that there won't be any recourse. So I see this as supplementing the land use and just, I do like the idea of using what's in place, like a temporary use permit. I imagine that can stipulate the timeframe. We did have in the original wording, we talked about financial repercussions. I don't know if we have anything in the town fee schedule. If somebody overstays their welcome, basically, and exceeds their temporary use. But, I think we don't want to make it prohibitive, but history has shown that we had a bunch of empty promises from CSU when it came to staging. They talked about just-in-time delivery, and what we ended up with was the use of Olathe Street for a very long time with buildings that never seemed to leave, like the construction management trailer, the dumpster, things like that. So this talks about residents needing to understand a high or a level of inconvenience. The town does not or support restricting construction if the applicant has met the town's land use requirement. Well, we weren't trying to restrict construction. We were trying to find some thoughtful way of spreading the pain when it comes to staging areas and having some level of accountability. I think I appreciate what Trustee Bell did for the staging area usage. I think that could be valuable. I think valuable insights to be tracked. Now, who tracks it? We could talk about that, but I think it's a good thing to encourage transparency, and it can raise questions. If you see certain areas that are red week after week, then I think this would be helpful for the trustees to look at and say, well, why is that red? Like, why is there no movement there? Why is that neighborhood being impacted so long? And then you start asking questions, and maybe it funnels down to whoever's behind staging in that regard. So I like the idea of using the temporary use permit. I like a lot of the changes that were made, but it wasn't the fact that we were restricting construction. It was that we were requiring the applicant to be thoughtful in how they did their staging. And I think CSU really dropped the ball and took advantage in this case. So I see that there is still a need to supplement what's in the land use code.
And I just want to point out that what I heard Becky say, or town manager Frank say, was that we want to be careful not to be too restrictive, or we won't get bids for those construction companies to come. So it is kind of an interesting idea to charge for overuse, if they have not, continued to, or move their stuff in a timely manner. But then that might, if they have to sign a contract, like, okay, you're going to be out in 12 weeks and they're worried about it, they might say, well, then I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go somewhere else for a different project. So just something else to consider. Commissioner Fry, do you have any comments or thoughts about that?
Nope.
Okay, thank you again for your contribution and the chart and everything.
I think that little,
It's sort of a condensed form of your chart, yeah.
good addition.
Yeah, I like that. And maybe we could have that be an
I do
appendix
too.
or an amendment or something to the policy. That might be a good idea. Any other thoughts?
I think it's a useful tracker. It just comes down to who's going to be assigned to track it.
We could take turns. We could each do a month.
So at this point, we have kicked back to us a revised staging policy. What I would like to do is to table discussion until maybe our June meeting. We all take a look and figure out what we would like to change. So I would like to make that motion that we table, assuming that the commissioners all agree that we should continue down the path that we were tasked with, which was developing this policy.
And I'd just like to check with town staff if that's appropriate for timeline for you guys.
Yep.
Okay, all right. Do I need a motion for that?
I'll second the
Yeah,
motion.
I think you may, yep.
What's
okay.
the benefit of holding off until June?
So that,
Talk about it. Sean.
so that we could look at it and be sure that we agree with it. I don't have any other comments, and I don't feel like I'm going to make any changes, but Rocco wants to take another look.
I think it would give some time to figure out, based on the explanation from the town manager, what makes sense and what
Okay.
we would recommend to change before it goes back to the trustees. Because it did go before the trustees for a decision, they kicked it back to us.
So we need to think about it some more. Okay.
Correct. I think that's what. All in favor, we have a motion on the floor of tabling this approval of the policy at this time,
Till the June meeting.
till the
yes.
June meeting, yeah.
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. Business 6B, selecting a chair and a co-chair. I know that in our, in the Muni Code that we're to select officers at the beginning of the year. We didn't have a full component of commissioners and elected to wait until we had a full house, and we do now. But I would like to propose that we we table, we get some table chairs. Oh my goodness, it's been a long day. Table selecting a chair and a co-chair at this time until our next June meeting. So Commissioner Morales can get a better feel for working with us and we with her, so.
Second.
All in favor of that idea?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right. 6C, PC compound proposal. Commissioner Blasi has drafted a proposal. I believe he'd like to present.
Sure. Thanks, Bo. So we've been talking about this for a while, updating the comp plan. It was signed in 2019. It's 5 years old. And so came up with a proposal, but this is all up for discussion. So I'll just go through we as a group can choose to pick which goals we want to try to pursue. And then heard about the timeline and trustee Walker saying, that he needs the information a little sooner for the budget process. And, I think we could get materials through town staff to get to the trustees as just information as the process goes. But I think we do need the amount of time allocated if we all decide this is something we want to proceed with. So be thinking about, as I just go over the goals quickly, are we all in? Are we all willing and able to support doing homework? Potentially meeting twice a month, hosting public information sessions, maybe a booth at Bronc Day. And so this is going to require our time, but I think the payoff will be worth it. So you can read the objective, midpoint update, and then the goals. Goal 1, we can talk about this more because later in the packet, we talk about the vision. In this case, the comprehensive plan has 5 or 6 vision statements. Is that appropriate? Is that something we want to look at? That'll add a little bit of time to the process. And so we could all discuss that. Goal 2, the review where we're at, look at the assumptions, and look at where we want to go for the next 5 years. And also, I think we look out for the 10-year planning horizon. So when we do have to redo the comprehensive plan, do a formal rewrite in 5 years, we're already halfway there. One of the good parts of the comp plan is it has an implementation matrix and talks about who should be doing what and where the funding could come from. Some of that's aspirational. Some of it may not make sense. And those are things that we can review and also work with the other committees to have them review in their areas of expertise. Goal 3, there's the capital improvement program. And that used to be done on an annual basis. I don't know what the status is now, but this coordination with the other committees gives us a chance to coordinate and figure out what they deem as essential recommendations for the town's capital improvement program, especially based on limited resources. And then goal 4, really strengthening the teamwork among the volunteers, the town staff, the trustees, and develop our planning experience so that when there is a comp plan update in 5 years, hopefully we'll have some resident expertise in that. So that's just 4 of the things that I thought of that we could potentially coordinate and some benefits that we could get from that. You'll see in the timeline that we need to make a recommendation to the trustees this evening. That's per this timeline. We can table it, that's fine, but we won't have good inputs for the budget cycle. The timeline does envision meeting again later this month on the last Tuesday of the month to look at visioning. And really the rest of your packet talks about visions and kind of where we're at as a town. Is 5 visions appropriate for the town? And maybe we have some homework to do. I did a little bit of homework. This talks about initiating the process. Do we even include the visions? Do we include the capital improvement program? I think if we do the comprehensive plan, I think the work that we're doing with the committees would inform the capital improvement program as well. We look at organizational mandates in the town code. It's within the planning commission powers and duties to come up with the plan, comprehensive plan, and why it's necessary. And I bolded a few items there. And the last one is the wise and efficient expenditure of public funds. So just a quick thank you both for keeping up with me. The vision statements, this is a quick primer on what a vision can do and what a vision can be. and some examples of some other communities and what their vision statements are. We scroll down and look at so there's South Carolina. So that's the county in South Carolina. They have these visions and a mission. The next one is Toronto. So it's okay to have a multi-pronged vision and to have multiple components to it, but when you have multiple visions, I think we could be better served with having a more clear focus. And then Kansas City. There's numerous visions throughout comprehensive plans through municipalities in Colorado. And so if visioning is something that we decide to take a look at, there are examples that we can compare, but it'll take some homework. And then the next slide talks about our comprehensive plan. So it has a vision for history, health, economy, development, infrastructure. And then page 28 talks about the very last paragraph I want to get at, that subsequent goals and policies support each other to build a combined that creates blah, blah, blah. I disagree with that. I think it gets muddled. I think it makes some assumptions that goals and policies are creating some other combined vision. And I think that can potentially be confusing. And so what I'm recommending is that we pursue goal 1, which is to reconstruct a unified town vision. So we kind of know what the overarching vision is instead of having these disparate 5 items that are supposed to somehow come back and support each other. It'll take some time and some work. And so that's why I offer it for discussion. Are we willing to put the time and work in?
Okay, I'm going to speak next, Rocco, about thank you for your work on this. I want to kind of back it up a little bit. We are 3 years. This is our 4th year of the comp plan. It was, if you look at it, it's 2020, 2021, 2022, 2020, the year of 2020, 21, 22, 23. So actually, I guess you're right. This is our 5th year. I don't feel an urgency for us to timelines and so forth. We may find that we find the comp plan is perfectly fine. And, oh, you want to speak first? I'm sorry, jump up there.
I just want to clarify something.
Yep.
For 2025 budget, we will send out a request to all committees, commissions, and that comes out in September or
August,
August.
September.
Okay. So if you're concerned about trying to get things done for a 2025 budget, we'll have a separate request for items that you want to see in the 2025 budget coming out in August. And that, it's kind of 2 different things, but related somewhat. So the request for 2025 budget should capture hopefully any items you might want to try to get in 2025.
Does the town have a current CIP? Capital Improvement Program?
Within the comp plan.
So that's 2019.
So
We
we
did that strategic thing with Paul.
We do have the CIP that was updated by one of the trustees in 2021. I have continued to annotate in it as projects are accomplished. I have a version of it that I keep my own notes in. That's something that I could easily share. I think I shared it with Paul last year.
Yeah.
But it's rough. It is literally my notes. So take it as that. I'll try to get it brushed up a little bit here in the next week or so and get it out to you with the most recent projects and updates on it.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify the 2025 budgeting process.
Okay, and I'm not perceiving that there's any difference in August and August. Am
Well,
I?
if you're trying to get all the comp plan
Yeah.
updated by August, I'd say that's
No,
fairly
we're not
aggressive.
trying to do that, but you're wanting to know, so if we decide there's projects that we recommend,
that'll come in August.
that's in
call
August.
for-
Okay, no, I
things
understand.
of
Yeah, I've got
2025.
that separate in my mind. So anyway, I'm going to go back and, thank you. I'm going to go back and just my ideas, I started looking at the comp plan recently as well. I think it's a beautiful document. I don't know that I think we all need to look at it together, analyze it and determine, are there really problems with it? What do we, you're citing that you think the vision needs to be amended and it's inappropriate. So, anyway, I want to just, have us think about, in my opinion, looking at the comp plan. That's one issue. Separate to that is our CIP plan, projects that have been recommended. Are those appropriate and updated? That's in my mind. I think they're kind of two different things. I'm not in favor of completely overhauling the comprehensive plan. I don't see any way that we can do that. It's very professionally done. I don't think we can do it professionally as it is already produced. So that's my opinion. Commissioner Fry, could you speak about what you think about, what would your idea be to sort of look at the comp plan again? I think that's,
Well,
I think
I
that
would
base,
agree
that's
that
what we're all
we need
talking
to
about.
look at it again and see where we are. What was in it? Have we accomplished those things? Do we still want them? Kind of a review of that nature, and then we could decide whether it needs to be modified a little or totally redone. And I'd say we need to review it first.
Okay, and that, I think that's what I'm trying to say. That was more articulate. Commissioner Esch.
Well,
And Commissioner Esch was part of the whole deal. She's got her signature on the front
my
page.
late husband and I were involved in this, and it was a very lengthy process where citizens came in and talked, and there were maps all over, and we did all these kind of things. And I thought it was very interesting. And I don't object to it, but I've participated in every comp plan that this town has ever done. And what's the point of doing another one? That's kind of the way I think. We kind of got the picture of our town. And I'm not objecting to reviewing, and I would simplify it. I would just simplify it. It's gotten too complicated. We did a lot of work with Paul Yingling. He resigned from the Planning Commission when I was put on. And then he did a strategic planning with all the committees for what did we think were the most important things. And we did that. And the only problem I have is we don't want to waste our time sitting around thinking about things to write up all the time. That's kind of my position. Thank you.
And thank you. That I was thinking about Paul's project as well. And maybe I've got that in my notes and I need to dig that out. But we could use that data because that was a lengthy process and it was recent. It was just a year ago. So, yeah. And Brandy, do you have any thoughts jumping in here?
Actually, yes. So to talk about the timelines, I agree that redoing the whole process right now at the 5-year mark is probably not useful. However, doing an internal review like we're discussing right now would be good. And then maybe do another town-wide reassessment at the 10-year mark, and then just kind of keep leapfrogging it like that. So that it's not a question of when, we have these steps. That would be the first one. And the second one talks to Commissioner Blasie's comments about the mission. I understand where y'all went with all of those. I think there were 5 items that are currently being captured as mission statements, being the things that the town were most interested in, cared about the most. We might summarize all that into one mission statement and then still keep those as our core values. And then that still keeps the intent of everything, but it simplifies it a little bit. So that might answer some of your concern as well.
Well, and I'm just going to clarify. So a mission statement encompasses what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to accomplish it. And your vision is more your values and your end product that you see. So it's sort of, yeah, so they're sort of separate. But anyway, we can look at that too and simplify it.
If I can, I want to address something that Commissioner Esch said, and that's what's the value of this plan? Why are we doing this? What's the value in updating it? And that really is that it demonstrates to the Board of Trustees that the citizens that they serve are bought into these projects. Comp plan, you remember it had a huge amount of stakeholder engagement where the citizens were saying, yes, these are the projects and the assets that we have that are important to us. And then it helps that the Board of Trustees allocate resources to those projects, and it helps staff us to seek funding for those projects and implement them. So if you're working backwards from that and looking at it from that approach and why is it important to do it? Then doing an internal audit, certainly projects, there's a timeline in there that in 2020, this was going to happen. In 2023, that was going to happen. Nobody predicted COVID. So I'm sure that probably put that timeline off a little bit. And then the other thing too is that sometimes opportunities come up for funding to accomplish a certain project. And so having the flexibility to say, yeah, this is a good time to accomplish this one, even though it's not in that timeline. I guess having the timeline be rigid as Jello, it has form and it has function, but it's flexible enough to pursue those opportunities when they come up. And then also auditing, the amount of work and the projects that have been accomplished. Is there follow-up that still needs to be done on them? Are they totally done? Are they still relevant? And then from there, kind of reworking that timeline, knowing that things happened during COVID. But I think that one of the things that can make this really strong and powerful is ensuring that there is still that opportunity for that public engagement, that stakeholder engagement. And I think that there's some really useful tools, including, public forums, but also surveys that can be done really, really easily as part of that to demonstrate that public engagement occurred.
Could,
It's also almost a baseline requirement document for certain grants.
100%.
that helped
grant-
you get grants.
Well, granting organizations, that's how they evaluate your grant was this project identified in your strategic plan or your comp plan? And they want to know that because they want to know that whatever project they're funding does indeed have that broad-based community support.
I would say if you look back historically, these have been funded by Christian Cassie's groups, and he gives us a lot of funds. And that was what he wanted to know too. What is our vision? How could he give us money to fit into our vision? And so that has been a guiding hand, not a bad one. I don't mean that, but that is the facts. And also, I will say, even though it was expensive, and Rocco talks about expense, and I agree with that. It's why pay people? But if you look back historically, and I have the ones that I participated in, even when they had surveys, not many people participated. Only the ones that are interested and that's always true in government. We're never going to get the whole town. But I agree that with Todd said too, it's a vehicle for saying, we're really thinking about things in our town, and here's why we need some more money to get it done. So I understand the purpose, but it started way back with Christian Cassie doing this for us. Thank you.
And Becky, this might be my lack of knowledge. I'm not well educated. Could you just shoot me like a bullet point of here's what, because I have not applied for a lot of grants. What is looked at? What do we need to include? What kind of data needs to be there? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that would help.
How do we demonstrate in a grant application that the project we're applying for was identified in our strategic plan or in our comp plan?
Right, how much information, what kind of
Mhm.
data needs to go in there, that kind of thing, so that it's ready to go.
I think oftentimes just having knowing that your comp plan went through a public process is something that they do want to know. It can further be supported by letters of support from community organizations or residents. And then, just being listed and considered. It doesn't have to be, you can get into way deeper levels of Parks, Rec and Trails master plans. GOCO funds those a lot of times, and where, you know, community or the community will come around its spaces and dive into those plans specifically with the residents and identify the certain types of things that they would like to see in their parks. This is really the same, just on a less fun basis, because it's talking about roads and infrastructure a lot of times versus, you know, the fun things like our parks.
One thing about grants too is, for instance, our fishing pier it was because of ADA. You fit it into the granting agency to make your pitch, and it may benefit more than just a person that is handicapped.
100%. There's that,
what I mean?
that perceived
You have
benefit.
to direct it to the granting agency and convince them that you fit in their plan.
100%.
So, thank you.
So, I think what I'm hearing is we don't know where we want to go. So the next possible time we can meet is May 28th. Between now and then, we could all review the comp plan, see if it's sufficient to meet the needs. I would like to see the CIP, where that's at, and see if we can play a role in helping to coordinate inputs on that, because that's something that was always added to every year. We always had more and more projects. And if that hasn't been added to, there may be some things that we could update. So I guess at this point, we're not going to make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees until we know what we want to recommend. And so I would propose that we meet on May 28th, Tuesday, May 28th, and relook at the comprehensive plan and determine how much we want to try to update, if at all.
Would you like this scheduled as a work session?
Yes, yes, that would be great. And I'm going to have to limit it to an hour. I've got quite a busy week. So.
So what,
Okay, so I'd like to amend my motion to conduct a work session on
Work
May
session.
28th to look at the comprehensive plan and come up with what we recommend with that.
a work session, is that what you said?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I'll second the amended motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 What time?
Not before 6:30 for me. We can do 6:30 to 7:30.
Good. Thank you, Rocco.
Yeah, it's 2 Tuesdays from now. Yeah. All right. I think with that, we can adjourn. Unless there's any other, I think not.
I think there's some other items on the agenda.
We took the other one off.
Correspondence.
Correspondence.
We've received no correspondence.
All right. The meeting is adjourned.